Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. Today we're continuing with Means of Salvation and Perfection by St. Alphonsus Liguori. Part 3, Mental Prayer. Chapter 1, Mental Prayer is morally necessary for salvation. It enlightens the mind. In the first place, without mental prayer the soul is without light. They, says St. Augustine, who keep their eyes shut cannot see the way to their country. The eternal truths are all spiritual things that are seen, not with eyes of the body, but with the eyes of the mind, that is, by reflection and consideration. Now they who do not make mental prayer do not see these truths, neither do they see the importance of eternal salvation and the means which they can adopt in order to obtain it. The loss of so many souls arises from the neglect of considering the great affair of salvation, and what we must do in order to be saved. With desolation, says the prophet Jeremiah, is all the land made desolate, because there is none that considereth in the heart. Jeremiah 12:11. On the other hand, the Lord says that he who keeps before his eyes the truth of faith, that is death, judgment, and the happy or unhappy eternity that awaits us, shall never fall into sin. In all thy works remember thy last end, and thou shalt never sin. Ecclesiasticus 7:40. Saint Bonaventure also says that mental prayer is, as it were, a mirror in which we see all the stains of the soul. In a letter to the Bishop of Osmo, Saint Teresa says, "Although it appears to us that we have no imperfections, still when God opens the eyes of the soul, as he usually does in prayer, our imperfections are then clearly seen. He who does not make mental prayer does not even know his defects, and therefore, as St. Bernard says, he does not abhor them. He does not even know the dangers to which his eternal salvation is exposed, and therefore he does not even think of avoiding them. But he who applies himself to meditation instantly sees his faults and the dangers of perdition, and seeing them he will reflect on the remedies for them. By meditating on eternity, David was excited to the practice of virtue and to the sorrow and works of penance for his sins. I thought upon the days of old, and I had in my mind the eternal years, and I meditated in the night with my own heart, and I was exercised, and I swept my spirit." Psalm 76:6. When the soul, which the solitary turtle, retires and recollects itself in meditation to converse with God, then the flowers, that is, good desires, appear. Then comes the time of pruning, that is, the correction of faults, which are discovered in mental prayer. Consider, says St. Bernard, that the time of pruning is at hand, if the time of meditation has gone before. For, says the saint in another place, meditation regulates the affections, directs the actions, and corrects defects. It disposes the heart to the practice of virtues. Moreover, without meditation, there is not strength to resist the temptations of our enemies, and to practice the virtues of the gospel. Meditation is like fire with regard to iron, which, when cold, is hard, and can be wrought only with difficulty, but place it in the fire, it becomes soft, and the workman gives it any form he wishes. Says the Venerable Bartholomew a Martyribus, to observe the divine precepts and counsels, it is necessary to have a tender heart, that is, a heart docile and prepared to receive the impressions of celestial inspirations, and ready to obey them. It was this that Solomon asked of God. Give therefore to thy servant an understanding heart. 3 Kings 3:9. Sin has made our hearts hard and indocile, for being altogether inclined to sensual pleasures, it resists, as the apostle complained, the laws of the Spirit. But I see another law in my members fighting against the law of my mind. Romans 7:23. But man becomes docile and tender to the influence of grace, which is communicated in mental prayer, by the contemplation of the divine goodness, the great love which God has borne him, and the immense benefits which God has bestowed upon him. Man is inflamed with love. His heart is softened and made obedient to the divine inspirations. But without mental prayer, his heart will remain hard and restive and disobedient, and thus he will be lost. A hard heart shall fare evil at the last. Ecclesiasticus 3:27. Hence St. Bernard exhorts Pope Eugene never to omit meditations on account of external occupations. I fear for you, O Eugene, lest the multitude of affairs, prayer and consideration, being intermitted, may bring you to a hard heart, which abhors not itself because it perceives not. Some may imagine that the long time which devout souls give to prayer, and which they could spend in useful works, is unprofitable and lost time. But such persons know not that in mental prayer souls acquire strength to conquer enemies and to practice virtue. From this leisure, says St. Bernard, strength comes forth. Hence the Lord commanded that his spouse should not be disturbed. I adjure you that you stir not up nor awake my beloved till she please. Canticles 3:5. He says until she please, for the sleep or repose which the soul takes in mental prayer is perfectly voluntary, but is at the same time necessary for its spiritual life. He who does not sleep has not strength to work nor to walk, but goes tottering along the way. The soul that does not repose and acquire strength in meditation is not able to resist temptations, and totters on the road. In the life of the Venerable Saint Mary Crucified, we read that while at prayer she heard a devil boasting that he had made a nun omit the common meditation, and that afterwards, because he continued to tempt her, she was in danger of consenting to a mortal sin. The servant of God ran to the nun, and, with the divine aid, rescued her from a criminal suggestion. Behold the danger to which one who omits meditation exposes his soul. Saint Teresa used to say that he who neglects mental prayer needs not a devil to carry him to hell, but that he brings himself there with his own hands. And the abbot Diocels says that the man who omits mental prayer soon becomes either a beast or a devil. It helps us to pray as we should. Without petition on our part, God does not grant the divine help. And without aid from God, we cannot observe the commandments. From the absolute necessity of prayer and petition arise the moral necessity of mental prayer, for he who neglects meditation and is distracted with worldly affairs will not know his spiritual wants, the dangers to which his salvation is exposed, the means which he must adopt in order to conquer temptations, or even the necessity of the prayer of petition for all men. Thus, he will give up the practice of prayer, and by neglecting to ask God's graces, he will certainly be lost. The great Bishop Palafox, in his annotations to the letters of St. Teresa, says, "How can charity last unless God gives perseverance? How will the Lord give us perseverance if we neglect to ask him for it? And how shall we ask him without mental prayer? Without mental prayer, there is not the communication with God, which is necessary for the preservation of virtue." And the Cardinal Bellarmine says that for him who neglects meditation, it is morally impossible to live without sin. Some one may say, I do not make mental prayer, but I say many vocal prayers. But it is necessary to know, as St. Augustine remarks, that to obtain the divine grace it is not enough to pray with the tongue. It is necessary also to pray with the heart, on the words of David. I cried to the Lord with my voice. Psalm 141:2. The Holy Doctor says, Many cry, not with their own voice, that is, not with the interior voice of the soul, but with that of the body. Your thoughts are a cry to the Lord. Cry within, where God hears. This is what the apostle inculcates, praying at all times in the Spirit, Ephesians 6:18. In general, vocal prayers are said distractedly with the voice of the body, but not of the heart, especially when they are long, and still more especially when said by a person who does not make mental prayer, and therefore God seldom hears them and seldom grants the graces asked. Many say the Rosary, the office of the Blessed Virgin, and perform other works of devotion, but they still continue to sin. But it is impossible for him who perseveres in mental prayer to continue in sin. He will either give up meditation or renounce sin. A great servant of God used to say that mental prayer and sin cannot exist together, and this we see by experience. They who make mental prayer rarely incur the enmity of God, and should they ever have the misfortune of falling into sin, by persevering in mental prayer, they see their misery and return to God. Let a soul, says St. Teresa, be ever so negligent. If it persevere in meditation, the Lord will bring it back to the haven of salvation. Chapter 2. Mental prayer is indispensable in order to attain perfection. All the saints have become saints by mental prayer. Mental prayer is the blessed furnace in which souls are inflamed with the divine love. In my meditation, says David, a fire shall flame out. Psalm 38:4. Saint Vincent de Paul used to say that it would be a miracle if a sinner who attends the sermons in the missions or in the spiritual exercises were not converted. Now he who preaches and speaks in the exercises is only a man, but it is God himself that speaks to the soul in meditation. I will lead her into the wilderness, and I will speak to her heart. Hosea 2:14. St. Catherine of Bologna used to say, he who does not practice mental prayer deprives himself of the bond that unites the soul with God. Hence, finding her alone, the devil will easily make her his own. How, she would say, can I conceive that the love of God is found in the soul that cares but little to treat with God in prayer? Where but in meditation have the saints been inflamed with divine love? By means of mental prayer, Saint Peter of Alcantara was inflamed to such a degree that in order to cool himself he ran into a frozen pool, and the frozen water began to boil like water in a cauldron placed on the fire. In mental prayer, St. Philip Neri became inflamed and trembled so that he shook the entire room. In mental prayer, St. Aloysius Gonzaga was so inflamed with divine ardor that his very face appeared to be on fire, and his heart beat as strongly as if it wished to fly from the body. St. Lawrence Justinian says, by the efficacy of mental prayer, temptation is banished, sadness is driven away, lost virtue is restored, fervor, which has grown cold, is excited, and the lovely flame of divine love is augmented. Hence, St. Aloysius Gonzaga has justly said that he who does not make much mental prayer will never attain a high degree of perfection. A man of prayer, says David, is like a tree planted near the current of waters, which brings forth fruit in due time. All his actions prosper before God. Blessed is the man who shall meditate on his law day and night, and he shall be like a tree which is planted near the running waters, which shall bring forth its fruit in due season, and his leaf shall not fall off, and all whatsoever he shall do shall prosper. Psalm 1:1-3. Mark the words in due season, that is, at the time when we ought to bear such a pain, such an effort, etc. St. John Chrysostom compared mental prayer to a fountain in the middle of a garden. Oh, what an abundance of flowers and verdant plants do we see in the garden, which is always refreshed with water from the fountain. Such, precisely, is the soul that practices mental prayer. You will see that it always advances in good desires, that it always brings forth more abundant fruits of virtue. Whence does the soul receive so many blessings? From meditation by which it is continually irrigated. Thy plants are a paradise of pomegranates, with the fruits of the orchard, the fountain of gardens, the well of living waters, which run with a strong stream from Lebanon. Canticles 4:13-15. But let the fountain cease to water the garden, and behold, the flowers, plants, and all instantly wither away. And why? Because the water has failed. You will see that as long as such a person makes mental prayer, he is modest, humble, devout, and mortified in all things. But let him omit meditation, and you will instantly find him wanting in modesty of the eyes, proud, resenting every word, indevout, no longer frequenting the sacraments of the church. You will find him attached to vanity, to useless conversations, to pastimes, and to earthly pleasures. And why? The water has failed, and therefore fervor has ceased. My soul as earth without water unto thee. My spirit hath fainted away. Psalm 142, 6-7. The soul has neglected mental prayer. The garden is therefore dried up, and the miserable soul goes from bad to worse. When a soul abandons meditation, St. Chrysostom regards it not only as sick, but as dead. He says, the holy doctor, who prays not to God, nor desires to enjoy assiduously his divine conversations, is dead. The death of a soul is not to be prostrated before God. The same Father says that mental prayer is the root of the fruitful vine, and St. John Climacus writes that prayer is a bulwark against the assaults of afflictions, the spring of virtues, the procurer of graces. Rufinus asserts that all the spiritual progress of the soul flows from mental prayer, and Gerson goes so far as to say that he who neglects meditation cannot, without a miracle, lead a life of a Christian. Speaking of mental prayer, Jeremiah says, he shall sit solitary and hold his peace, because he hath taken it up upon himself. Lamentations 3:28. That is, a soul cannot have a relish for God unless it withdraws from creatures and sits, that is, stops to contemplate the goodness, the love, the amiableness of God. But when solitary and recollected in meditation, that is, when it takes away its thoughts from the world, it is then raised above itself, and departs from prayer very different from what it was when it began it. St. Ignatius of Loyola used to say that mental prayer is the short way to attain perfection. In a word, he who advances most in meditation makes the greatest progress in perfection. In mental prayer, the soul is filled with holy thoughts, with holy affections, desires, and holy resolutions, with love for God. There man sacrifices his passions, his appetites, his earthly attachments, and all the interests of self-love. Moreover, by praying for them, in mental prayer he can save many souls, as was done by St. Teresa, St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi, and is done by all souls enamored of God, who never omit in their meditations to recommend to him all infidels, heretics, and all poor sinners, begging him also to give zeal to priests who work in his vineyard, that they may convert his enemies. In mental prayer, we can also, by the sole desire of performing them, gain the merit of many good works, which we do not permit. For as the Lord punishes bad desires, so on the other hand he rewards all our good desires. And we will continue this next Sunday. He's going to talk about how to do mental prayer next time. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.